Good morning, Ayin Beis, volume 3, top of page 1474. Yeah, we're closing in here. Another 3 pages till end of Ayin Beis, at least the amount that the Rebbe Rashab wrote. So, discussing Yechudei Law and Yechudei Tata, 2 levels of unity, which began on the bottom of page 1466, talking about Shema, Yisrael, and Baruch Shem, Kved Malchus Leil Vod, and in Shema itself, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, more specifically, 2 levels of unity. To understand that, he explained basically, firstly, the distance and the relationship between God and existence, the creator and the creation, that it's not like Yesh mi Yesh, meaning commensurate, there's nothing in common between them, it's Yesh ma Ayin, which has 2 key points. One is that they're infinitely distant or not commensurate to each other. And secondly, that it doesn't affect and have an impact on the source, as we learned. And yet, there's the level of the divine that does manifest within existence. So there's really 2 levels of ayin, or 2 levels of oyer. The oyer, the creative energy that God expresses, His power to create. So there's the power that remains removed and above, what he called like the oyer la'atzmai, and there's the oyer hashayach la'elamus. So the difference between Atzilus and Biyah, he explained, is that difference. Atzilus is more as it's kolol b'atzmusei, and he explained what that meant. In Atzmusei itself, it's how God is envisioning, relating to existence, but it's all still within the core essence. And then there's Biyah, an actual Yesh is created through the Parsa. The Parsa is a vital piece here because the Parsa is what is the partition that allows for an independent consciousness to emerge. And there's Bittul HaYesh. As he called it, a Bittul that comes Medaitei Meditzene. Whereas the Bittul HaMitzias of Yechudei Law comes Memela automatically. Here we're talking now a Bittul, as he put it, that comes Medaitei Meditzene, as we learned yesterday. Those words, said it twice, Medaitei Meditzene, Kabbalah Sel Machal Shamayim. So the first he called, Yechudei Law, he called Bittul HaAmiti, it senses there's nothing but the divine, and in Biyah it's a Yesh, but the Yesh is aligned with, and through a contemplation comes to realize that it should be bottled and sublimated or subjugated and nullified to or dedicated completely to godliness. What he calls Bittul HaYesh. And this is all due to the fact that there was a Parsa, which is a concealer that concealed the divine energy, and that's why it's a lower level. But there's still a yichud. It's called Yechudei Tata. So now we have it in the context of Atzilus and Biyah. We also know in Atzilus the Klolos you have these 2 levels. Well, let me correct myself. Atzilus the Klolos is the lower level before the Tzimtzum. And then there's the level of Oyer la'atzmai. We called Etzema Oyer Nespashta Se'er. That's how it is before the Tzimtzum. We're going to get back to that as well. Okay, so we have these 2 levels of Yichud, and now the Rebbe Rashab broadens the picture by telling us that these 2 levels exist in the whole Seder Shtalshus, not just Atzilus and Biyah. He explained, Kamoy came from the Meitzel to the Netzalim, you also have these 2 levels of Ayin. What are they?
Before the Tzimtzum?
He explained Esses Vizag Nuzes Atzilus the Klolos. We discussed that yesterday, yeah. You said the Shadish of Mamala Kalam. That's the Oyer Shaykh al-Elam, is how it's called Atzmus. Is that what you're asking? And then the parenthesis said, Esses Vizag Nuzes, the Sher Sharsha Eris, the Sharsha Kalim, who Shahin Esses Vizag Nuzes. that what you're asking? Hello? Okay. Yeah. Middle of the
Yes.
page.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So now he broadens and says, similarly, you have also Keser and Chochmah. Chochmah is also Yesh Ma'ayin from Keser, Chochmah Ma'ayin to Motzah. So Chochmah would be like a Yesh compared to Keser, and the Ayin of Keser is the Ayin of the Yesh HaAmiti, where it's complete but, like he says, Uchamhu, that even though Keser Ayin, Afagav the Iu Ayir, even though it's a revelation, it's Ayir, but Uchamhu, it's dark and completely nullified. Kodam Ilas HaIlas, Shachlus Bittel Betachlis. So there's Keser, and then becomes the Ayin that's a mocker to the Yesh HaNetzal. So Keser itself is Yesh, the Ayin of the Yesh HaAmiti, the higher level of Yichud and Ayir. And when it becomes a mocker, a source for Chochm, it becomes the lower level for the Yesh HaNetzal, he calls it now. And there's also a Parsa, a partition between the two. Like we learned earlier in volume 2, that there's Parsa all the way to the highest levels. On top of page 1474, he also said the same is between Bina and Midas. Mi, Bara Ela, that there's also a Parsa between them. So here too, you have two levels of Ayin. Bina, and as it becomes a source for Midas. Bina Ela Midas, says Gamkem Parsa. So basically the Parsa is essentially the partition between the higher yichud and the lower yichud, or the higher entity and the lower entity, and therefore the difference between yichud eloh and yichud tata. That's where we stopped. Now he's going to broaden it even further and say that in general, these two levels also exist higher than Keser too. And that is, I'm reading line 2 on page 1474. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. Says, "Ubechlolis yeser b'chinas hakav hanimshach me'er ein sof." The kav, the line, the thread, a laser beam of light that manifests after the tzimtzum comes. We know a thin ray, a kav achut, a line and a thread, which comes from me'er ein sof. That's already a giler air, relatively speaking. The kav, compared to the air higher than the kav, is relating to existence. It's true, it's a lot higher than Atzilus and a lot higher even than Keser, but it is ultimately a air that's mokalish talshlus. And v'nikra shchinta. We learned earlier when we talk kutsha bricha v'shchinta, Commission is Bar Le'il on page 1439, calls it Shechina. Shechina is not Kush, Shechina is already Shechenes u'mislabeshes. It's the divine energy that manifests, resides, dwells, and manifests within existence. Shechina, called that the Kav. So we see from this that the Kav generally is already the air that relates to existence. And it too comes. And now he's going to use the word tzimtzum. So the hefsek had tzimtzum. He doesn't use the word parsa, as I pointed out, because tzimtzum is usually reserved for the tzimtzum arishin, even though it's tzimtzumim throughout ishtalshlos, but in contrast, between Atzilus and Biyah, he called it parsa. Between Chochmah and Keser Chochmah, he called it parsa. Between Bina and Midas, parsa. But now he says that this kav comes out the hefsek had tzimtzum, through the interruption or the pause of the tzimtzum that concealed the Ein Sof before the tzimtzum. The bechin is dilug v'richok min Atzmus. A leap and a distant from Atzmus. He means here Atzmus, the Eir before the tzimtzum. So here you see the word dilug, richuk, which are strong words. So that's why the kav is only a narrow light, meaning it's not Ein Sof in its entire breadth. Like before the tzimtzum, the air completely consumed all of existence, or all of what would be existence, and there's no room for anything else except divine consciousness. The tzimtzum conceals that and allows the kav to come, so the kav is following a tzimtzum, a leap. It tells us, "I am ashekosa b'dibra maskul v'sfartem ezras." He says to look in the Maimer, Besfartem, Tofresh Ayin Zayit. Before he referred to Tofresh Ayin Ches. So now he's referring to a year earlier, Tofresh Ayin Zayit, Ezras. It's just another way of writing Tofresh Ayin Zayit. Okay. So Harizeh, B'chinas Ayin Shala Yesh de Elamus. So then what is the Kav in this context? It's the Ayin, it's Oir. It's an Oir Eliki. But it's an Oir that's already somewhat measured, like a Kav, a line that has Milo Mata, has a hierarchy, and it's relatively speaking a Yesh, the Ayin to the Yesh of the world, meaning the lower level of Ayin, where we would identify with Bittul Hayesh or Yichud Tata. Doesn't say that explicitly, but that's the level. And what is the higher level? Before the Tzimtzum, and the infinite divine light pre-Tzimtzum, Hakol Batzmus, which is Kol Batzmus because it's still encompassed in the divine, like we learned earlier. That's the air that is just God's power to reveal himself, not relation to existence. So now you see one more broader picture where you see these two levels. So you can, so far we've said four things. These two levels, Atzilus and Biyah, Keser and Chochmah, Bina and Midas, and now everything saw before the Tzimtzum and the Kav. And these all go into the category of two levels of Oir. We're not talking about Atzmus itself, the Oir. One Oir that is purely an expression of God, so it's on God's terms, and the other is an Oir that relates to existence in one way or another. Even if it's Kol Batzmus meaning, but it's still already the level, like you said, Atzilus, is somewhat Yitzim and Achutz because it's relating to existence. And yet there's also the level of Biyah, which is a lower level, which is already existence itself. So all depending what levels we're talking about here. Yeah. Now, before I continue, let me just tie this together. So in volume 2, when he discussed this at length, these two levels of Ayin, and he gave us even more areas in the Shtalshlus where you see two levels of Ayin, there's a long discussion on what these two are, and it definitely complements what we learned here. I'm not going to go over that right now because it's not so directly relevant. Maybe at some point I will sum up what we learned in the bottom of the volume 2, but I do want to mention, and in volume 1, in the second half of volume 1, we started Shavuos Ayin Gimel. The big discussion there on the difference between the two levels of Oir HaBligvul and Oir HaGvul. Or Sevav Kalalman and Mamala Kalalman. Remember in volume 1, when he lays out the whole map and the infrastructure, he talks about Makif and Pnimi from the beginning of the Hemshech. So for 50 chapters, he talks about Pnimiistic Oiris and Kalim, the structural Oir, the immanent Oir. Then he goes back to Keser, Makiv, the Makiv Dika Oir. And then he finally explains there are three levels. The first level that manifests within existence, there's the level that transcends existence, and there's the level that connects and unites both of them. It's a big theme in volume 1. But then he goes on to explain what is the different functions of these two levels. So briefly, one thing I do want to mention, which can be very helpful, he says the function of Erev Mamala Kalalman is to help integrate and transform existence to be aligned with godliness. The purpose of the higher Eir HaBligvul, is to create bittul, that existence should recognize the divine that's beyond it. This is essentially what we're learning. That Yichud Tata is godliness on our terms. It's bitla yesh, but it's bitla yesh. It's a yesh. Yichud Elah is godliness on God's terms. Ultimately, we want to join both, which we're going to be learning very shortly. The next paragraph is going to start going into, remember, Kel Deus Hashem, he said, is that he's Sevel, God contains both perspectives. And actually, they're like one. So the reason I'm pointing this out is because just to show you that what's happening here is really connecting it to themes that go back both in volume 2 and even back to the earliest parts of volume 1. Because ultimately the beginning of the whole Hemshech was Keser, and that Keser has 3 meanings and basically 3 dimensions. Keser as it relates to existence, Keser as beyond existence, and a level that's beyond that ultimately unites the lower 2. That's Mamala Seviv and Atzmus. So you see it all coming together. I just want to emphasize, I'm going to discuss this a lot more as we go on, because to me it appears that we are coming to the end of the Hemshech, even though the Rebbe Rashab does not finish all the points, and we will learn it in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. I believe we'll be able to draw out. But the mere fact that he's bringing this here, to me, indicates that he's connecting it back already to early themes. So it's very clear that I do not think, it's my opinion, I may be wrong, because the Rebbe Rashab, as we know, could surprise us and write another 100 pages, another 500 pages, another 1,000 pages. But the fact that he's doing it, to me, there's an inclination that he's trying to tie together the themes all the way back to early volume. Now, it's not a hechrich to say that, because the fact is, throughout the Hemshech, the Rebbe Rashab constantly connects it to earlier themes. But for some reason, it seems to me, when I'm reading it, it's very, if you go back to those pages in volume 1, very, very reminiscent and a lot of similar language. And again, there's 2 levels of bittul, one on our terms and one on the divine terms, and you ultimately want both. That's the ultimate interface, like we've discussed. In the interface, you don't want to compromise one or the other. You want them both together to be joined, the God, divine on God, the pure divine terms, and the divine that relates to us, which also explains why he's emphasizing so much these 2 levels throughout his Talshlos, the Shaykh LaElemus and that which is beyond the Elemus. And you want both of them ultimately. So with that said, I'm going to read now the end of this paragraph, where now he's going to bring it back and say all this that we just discussed, these 2 levels of Ayin, of the Yesh HaNivra, Ayin of Yesh HaAmiti and Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, or what he called before 2 levels of Oyer. He called it the Oyer, he said, Ha'ora K'moshe Klula Ba'etzem, Peich Izgalasha Ba'atzmus, and which is Muvdal, separate from creation. And Beis, Ha'ora Shabab Izgalas Kiruv El Yesh. I'm reading from page 1472. And the way he explained that Atzilus and Biyah, Keser and Chochmah, Bina and Midas, and now Eren Sub before the Tzimtzum and the Kav, he says now, that everything we've been doing, these are the 2 in the Yechudim, these 2 levels, the 2 unifications, the 2 levels of unity. Shema, which concludes with the words Hashem Echad, is a bittul of the higher Yichud, Yichudi Lo. Kula kamek lachashav, that everything is hula vadehu, there's nothing but divine. V'hainu b'chinas ayin sheyesh HaAmiti. The ayin of the Yesh HaAmiti being that it is an expression of course, like I gave the example, like the ambassador that God is sending that represents him, not engaging with the creation, with the structure. The kol mashnisava kol b'chinas ayin mamish bli shum mitzias klal. And at that level, what is sensed? That everything that's created, everything is completely nullified, but that's non-existent when you compare it to its course, like the sunlight within the sun. And the second level is Baruch Shem Kved Machus Le'elam Vod, Hu B'chinas Malchus. Kved Machusei Le'elam Vod. Here you're mentioning the word Malchus. Malchus is already, we said, Ein Melech B'Layam. You need a nation. Malchus is already Atzilus. Malchus of Atzilus that's manifesting within existence. Mepchinas Ayin Shala Yesh De'elamus. This is already a level of Ayin. It's still Ayin, it's divine Ayin, meaning it's beyond us, but it's an Ayin of the Yesh of the worlds. Sheyesh B'chinas Mitzias. Here there is existence. Rak Shehu B'chinas Bitl HaYesh. But existence is nullified, or existence is aligned. It doesn't have its own agenda and its own separate identity. This identity aligns itself willingly and through its own effort to the divine. Here he doesn't break it down that in Hashem in Shema itself you have both levels. He will mention it later, but here he just talks in general those two levels. So all the levels we just learned, these two things are basically Shema and Baruch Shem. So we have now two tracks. I don't want to use the word track. I used it before by creation and Avodah. But here two forms of divine energy. One that is beyond the Ayin of the Yesh HaAmiti, Yichud Elah, and the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, which is Yichud Tata. And the end of volume 2, he doesn't. I'm trying to recall. He may have mentioned also the two levels of Yichud. He definitely talks about Das Ani and Das Tachten there. Okay, so with that he concludes the paragraph, and I'll stop here if anybody wants to ask anything.
I have a question about these Parsas. I don't know if it's fair enough to call them. Although
question about what? About what?
Parsas, the screens, the breaks, if you will, and that's I don't know if you call them hefsekim. I don't know. He uses the word.
You're talking about the
yes,
Parsa?
The multiple parsas. Yes, I use the plural parsas. I don't know if that's. I think that's the plural of parsa, but anyways, the multiple parsas. And I don't know whether it's fair to call. He uses a hefsek regarding the tzimtzum. I don't know if you can call them all the parsas, each of them a hefsek. But in any case, beyond this progression or this I don't know, this system or structure of how shall I say, continual successions of Ayin and Yesh, if you will. I'm wondering if the function of the Parsas or the Parsas, among other things, is also relating to the diminution of light from the ultimate source of light to the lowest levels. Are the Parsas also what essentially cause the diminution, or is the diminution world by world? In other words, it's just from Keser to Chachma, and each from Malchus to the Chachma of each world, from Malchus of Atzilus to Chachma of Bria, etc.
I'm not clear what the two options are. The Parsa means partition, like a curtain. You put up a curtain to somewhat diffuse or to diminish the light that's coming in, let's say, through your window. And there are many curtains through all the levels, just like in the human body, there are membranes in the brain, there are membranes between the head and the heart, there are membranes of the diaphragm. So the Parsa are the partitions that exist in any structure, any piece of engineering. You have the circuit breakers that allow more energy, less energy. So Parsa is essentially regulators throughout the entire structure, and each one serves a role in that particular level, serves like a partition. Well, I'm not sure there are two. You're suggesting two options here.
No, I didn't mean to say that, and I may have misspoke. But
anyway, that's the bottom line. That's what the Parsas are.
But the question is where they exist. I know there are many
they're
of them.
So he just said B'chol sheyesh Parsas ad reish kol dargin. Top line. They exist throughout Shtalshelus everywhere. They're all over the place.
But they're not.
If you want an actual breakdown, more detail, I refer you back to volume 2. It's approximately middle of the book. I'll give you the page number a little later. But there he goes with much more in detail, the role of the Parsas and where they are located and so on. Here he just mentions it, but they are throughout. Wherever you have two levels, it's like any regulator. How many Parsas are there, for example, on your mobile phone, or in your kitchen sink of how to get the water in, or the circuits of electricity that run through your home? They're all over, and the same thing in the human body and in nature. They are essentially regulators that regulate the flow, and allow, as he says here, to be like a partition that conceals the higher levels as they go into lower levels.
Right, I get it.
I'm not sure what the question is.
Right, the question is where. The question is clearly it's between worlds. I think you also just said it's between Mochin and Midos of each of the worlds.
I said it's all over. It's everywhere. And if you wanted the details, go back. I'm not sure what. Did I not answer your question? They're everywhere. How many are there? Could be millions, trillions. So I don't know.
Are you saying there's a parsa between Chachma and Bina?
Yes.
Okay.
And there's between Bina and Midas, like he just said.
Okay, that's my only question.
Oh, okay, that could have been very easy, just to said, yeah. And as I said, in the middle of volume 2, he discusses that at length. Okay.
I thought
Are there any other questions? Any other question?
Yes, I mean, I thought Yitzchak was asking whether the Parsa itself was doing the diminishment,
As opposed to?
as opposed to the thing it separates into itself doing the diminishment. Each one has his own little diminishment in the actual thing it's separating from.
I was asking that too. I was also asking that.
Okay, what's
yes.
that? So I refer you back to volume 2 in middle where this is discussed at length. He talks about that as well. He talks about the difference between a tzimtzum within yourself and a tzimtzum through a third entity, and that you need both. Yeah. He talks about that as well. The difference between tzimtzum and parsa, a tzimtzum b'chol ha'olamus. It's a whole thing there in the Magid's Torah where he discusses this. Yeah. So I would refer, since he refers here, Commissioners Bar Leil, I can refer to you. Just to give you the page, I'll be happy to give you the page. You can study it there at length. We went over that for months and months,
Well, obviously, this is it's before.
Anyway,
before I
let me
joined the
just
class.
say the following. 1 second, we're talking over each other. Okay, so the Parsas begin basically. Well, it's a very big topic there, so you have to really begin first by page 832, is where it begins talking about somewhat those tzimtzumim. But the Parsa is directly, exact page number is page 859 and on, where it really starts talking about it at length. And it gets more and more intense as it goes along. There's really 2 places that he goes through it quite in detail. And then, again, okay, as I said that, let's see. Comes back to it again. Let me just see.
And I apologize. This is because I wasn't part of the class at the time, so I don't want to take up class time.
That's what I'm just telling you. Go look in those pages and let's move on. Okay, you don't need to elaborate. It was clear. I'm asking if there are any other questions anybody has while I look here.
I have a question, more philosophically or hashkafically.
So let's see if anybody else has questions, if you don't mind for a second.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions? Okay. The next place to go is to go on page 956 and on as well. That may even be more elaborate there. Okay, those are the pages. Yeah, I have another question. Go ahead.
Yeah. Philosophically, this the Indian of 2 Yichud and Yichud Tatan and Das Elyon, Das Tachton, and essentially a Yichud from above to below from God's perspective, and a Yichud from Lamata Lamaila from our perspective. I got all that, but at the same time, both Yichudim are concepts that we as humans are contemplating. So in a sense, I mean, God, he cares, but doesn't really care. He wants us to relate to him, but he doesn't need to relate to, he does everything. So we're still contemplating it. It's just one, we're contemplating it from our perspective, Bittul HaYesh, HaNivra, and the second is, this Bittul, I guess.
Yeah, so what's the question?
Well, it's from God's perspective, but it's really still from our perspective. We're just seeing it from top down rather than from bottom up. Is that correct?
Let's even say that's the case. Maybe it's not the case. Let's say, so what? Okay, so there's 2 perspectives.
Just a clarification. You say from God's perspective, we can't see how God sees. We can only see how we see.
Because God can tell us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good answer. That's enough. You answered the question. That's great. Thank you.
Okay. So let's move now And anyway, this thing is still in the middle, and we're going to learn a lot more about this now as we go on. And I would just to say, let's try to process less and just read, and you'll see interesting stuff will emerge now. So now comes the next paragraph. And now the Rebbe Rashab is going to go a little deeper now to explain that Kel Deus Hashem, that in Hashem, he's able to be stable both these perspectives. So now we're being told that in addition that there are two perspectives, God contains both of them and unites both of them. If you may recall, back in the bottom, when he started this whole discussion, bottom of 1466, when he said that the mitzvah is mitzvah sayichud, klolos mitzvah sakrishma, mitzvah sayichud. And what is yichud elikus? B'chinas yichud ilah, yichud etata. Sevu kalam, mamal kalam, b'derech klal. Yichud ilah is sevu kalam, and yichud etata is mamal kalam. And v'gam, he said a very key line there. V'gam liyachid l'chaber beis b'chinas yichud hanal. Ta'kol echad. And also to join together, not just two levels of unity, but these two levels of unity, that itself, we're going to unite. These two levels of unity. And if you go back even earlier, in Kol HaMayrach be'echad, where he discussed that we should elaborate on the contemplation of echad, Hashem echad, he also discussed at length there that we begin from the bottom up. We begin from existence, and we come to understand that Dvar Hashem, that vivifies and creates existence. Then that dibur is encompassed in God's thought. And God's thought is encompassed in God's faculties. And God's faculties are encompassed in God's etzem. All the way to the highest levels before the tzimtzum, all the way to Kedem Alei Saratzin, all the way to the source itself in the earliest stages. And that ultimately, Mayrach Be'echad is understanding that it's all one. From our perspective, it's not one because we are living in a structured existence of hierarchy, level by level. But from God's perspective, it's all one. And ultimately, as I've discussed many times, this is like maybe the central theme of Ayin Beis, the interface is such that after thousands of years of Avodah and tremendous amount of work, as we grow from children, little children, from mutfa to murgish to muskel, as we discussed at length, slow process of maturity, of development, of expanding our containers and growing, climbing the mountain. As I mentioned yesterday, climbing the ladder, that there's ultimately an ability to come to appreciate not just that there are levels of unity, that from God's perspective, it's actually all mamish one. But you can never come there if you can't understand the oneness on your terms. There's no way you can come there. So like when Moshe said, show me your face, show me your glory, your face. No one can see my face and live, Hashem says. See my back. And from my back, first figure out what you could understand. And then slowly you'll be able to come to Yediyas Hashlila through a process of extrapolation, process of elimination, where you slowly be able to appreciate higher levels to the point where you're able to suspend your very self so you can then absorb a higher reality. But that cannot happen in the beginning. First, you need to understand it on your terms. This is a theme that I've been talking about probably thousands of times throughout Ayin Beis, because that's the whole foundation of Chassidus and Torah in general, that each of us climb step by step. And as we climb, all these levels, we come to higher and higher levels. Even right here, we learned that Biyah and Atzilus, and then Midas and Bina, and then Chochmah and Keser, and then the Kav and before the Tzimtzum. These are not same levels. They're very, very different levels. You can't understand Eden Sah before the Tzimtzum if you can't figure out Atzilus and Biyah. And within Biyah itself, there's also plenty of levels of Yichud Ilah, Yichud Tatah. He doesn't mention it here, but he mentioned it earlier. So the point being is that ultimately, as I've said a number of times in talking about interface, God could have made it a lot easier. He could say, you can connect with me on my lower levels. You never connect with my etzem. Or you can connect with my etzem, but you lose your identity entirely. You have to give up everything. I want it to be both together. You working through your system and with the tzimtzum, like we learned, you transform the tzimtzum. You don't eliminate it, and you don't bypass it. You transform it slowly, slowly, which he called earlier in volume 2, the tzimtzum he called the nefesh habamis in Aveda. You transform it, then you, on your terms, can ultimately understand and appreciate me on my terms. So initially, that doesn't make sense because God and us are infinitely apart and more than infinite apart. But God did implant parts of himself within us, whether it's the neshama, whether it's chelik elikam mal mamish, whether it's mitziusim atzmus in the yesh, whether it's the built in mitzius nimtza that is also in the yesh, and so on and so forth. So all of that comes together, and when you have the proper aveda of guf with the body and the yesh, and the aveda of the neshama, both the aveda of oir and the aveda of keli, or like he said, the aveda of the neshama ner Hashem nishmasadim, then ner mitzvah and teira oir, and the avedus atfilah, which is from the bottom up, and teira from the top down, and all the overlaps and interconnectivity between all of them. You have a full system called teira that allows us to have this ultimately full fusion, complete fusion between dira lo yizbarach b'tachtenim, which means what? Tachtenim is the lowest. Tacht n'shein tacht l'matim, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya. And the dira lo yizbarach is loy la'atzmusei, the highest. That Atzmus will be comfortable in this world. Not even more than in Atzilus, and more than even Eidei saw before the Tzimtzum, for all the reasons we've learned and will continue to learn. And so now, the next stage here is to find out, okay, now that you explained that there's yichud on different levels, generally speaking, yichud tato, yichud law, now how they join together. That's going to be the next step in this conversation here, discussion. And again, this is taken from the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, which in turn is based on the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, Amagbi L'Sheves, Bika Hashem Elokeinu, Amagbi L'Sheves. And this is, if you want to compare it to Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, now we're talking about the bottom of page 381. I have it marked up here, the corresponding pages. So if you have the Maimer Murat Soy Bereshis, Maimer Chanukah, to the bottom of 381. As I said, we will, please God, be learning the Maimer of the Mittler Rebbe once we're done with this, to understand the context and also the continuing themes. So with that short introduction, let's now learn the next paragraph. Omnom. Now, omnom is a qualification, however, because you just said there are two levels of bittul, two levels of ayin. So omnom, now comes the pasuk says something more than those two levels. He says these two levels are actually one. Masha Kosev Keil Deus Hashem is going back to the pasuk cited 2 pages, page 1472, the paragraph on top. He says when it says Keil Deus Hashem, that God is, it doesn't say that they're just 2 days. It says Keil Deus, that God contains both these days. Who said Bechinas Atzmus and Sof Keilu Beis Days, the Das Elyon and the Das Tacht. That he actually encompasses and includes both. Though they're opposites of one another, because one is completely focused, is only divine, there's nothing else. The other is there's existence. Existence is aligned, 2 different perspectives. He now calls them opposites, actually. Earlier, he also called them, if you look at the 3rd line in the paragraph on page 1470, he called them Hafchim Zemezeh. But now with the pasuk is saying that he contains both of them. Because Das Elyon, the perspective from above, is Ayin Mamish, is utter nothingness. Shelo Yeshum is klal, as he's repeated several times. There's no existence. It's only the divine. It's divine energy. The Das Tachten and the perspective from below, who sheyesh b'chinas mitzias, there is an existence. Rak shabat b'chinas bitla yesh levad. This existence, however, is subjugated or sublimated or aligned with in a state, but only bitla yesh. It doesn't mean the existence is not nullified. It exists, but it's aligned. It doesn't have its own agenda. It's not doing its own thing, but it's there. So though they're two opposites, nevertheless, hine, ba'atzmus ein sof beza doyes achas hein. In Atzmus ein sof, both perspectives are one. Sheshneim emes, because they're both true. V'shneim miyuchadim be'ein sof, and both of them are united in ein sof, ub'chinis bittul v'ayin mamish, and the state of utter bittul and ayin. So even the lower perspective in Atzmus is exactly the same as the higher perspective. And instead, we need explanation what that means. So let's read what the Rebbe Rashab says, and then if anything needs further explanation, I'll try to do my best in explaining it. I don't want to speculate or guess because the Rebbe Rashab is discussing this. As I said, this is based on the Mittler Rebbe, but I see here, it's not really the language of the Mittler Rebbe. The Rebbe Rashab is using his own language to explain it, which is interesting. When we look at the Mittler Rebbe, we'll compare and see. So, but that's the statement he just made. It's a statement, he didn't explain it, he just said so. That in Atzmus, it's all one. Which you have to say that, because you can't say that in Atzmus you have a duality, two perspectives. It's all one perspective. But it's fascinating. See, from our point of view, this sounds like a total paradox. How could it be two things that are one when they're two opposite perspectives? But remember, by God, there are no paradoxes. The very concept of a paradox is a created one, meaning it's only a process. It's only as a result of a structured existence that has different approaches to things. But in Atzmus, there is no such thing as different approaches. So even though by us there are different approaches, the question is, how do we unite the two? How can it be that it should both have two different perspectives and still be all one in Atzmus, and both are in a state of utter ayin and bittul? Isn't the second level not utter ayin and bittul? The whole point is bittul yesh. How can bittul yesh be bittul mitzias from the perspective of Atzmus? All this is going to be now discussed. And of course, you can see how fundamental it is. And that's why I said that I feel very strongly that this is, the Rebbe Rashab is tying together a lot of the themes that he's discussed and bringing it to like a conclusion here. Okay. So that's the statement. Now let's go to the explanation. The hine, because now there's, well, maybe if anybody has questions, not on explaining this, but on what we just read, I'm happy to answer. With explanation, let's see what he's going to say. But if anybody wants clarity of what was just said, I'm happy to give you clarity. So he says like this now. The hine is barely ill, because now it was explained earlier. The b'chinas ha'ayin shel Yesh HaAmiti, that oyer, what he called hakol b'atzmus, the energy that is the koyach galas, the ayin of the Yesh HaAmiti, God's will and interest to reveal himself, to express himself, without relating to the world. It's just ayin shel Yesh HaAmiti, hu b'chinas ha'oyer hakol b'atzmus. That's what we learned. It's a oyer that is encompassed in Atzmus, similar to the sunlight within the sun. Only similar, obviously, it's not exact. Shemiyuchad hu b'atzmus yizbarach. In that state, it's completely miyuchad. It's one with Atzmus yizbarach. So Atzmus is beyond Gilui, but he has the power to reveal himself. He has the power to express himself. So in that state, it's one with who he is. The one who's choosing to reveal himself, that revelation as it is within his own core essence, is one with him. That's why it's in a state of ayin mamish, because it has no substance of its own. Its entire reality, its entire consciousness, if you wish, is divine. Because all it is God saying, I want to now express myself. I want to create the reality where there's expression. Atzmus doesn't need expression, doesn't need gilui, doesn't manifest in any form or shape, doesn't have manifestation even. All the language we use when we say something expresses itself, something exists, as we spoke, bilta mitzias nimtza, means it exists only because we don't have another word for it. But exists is not like our existence. It's not like it exists because you can see it, or it exists because it manifests in some way. It's reality, that's reality. It's very hard to fully define. You only can do is negate and say it's not like our reality. So, but that Atzmus that wants to now create expression. I want to express. Whatever that expression is, we're not getting into what the expression will ultimately be, creating a world. But before creating a world, first he needs to want to express. He wants to manifest and create a mitzias nimtza, as opposed to built a mitzias nimtza, something that does manifest. So all it is just his will. I don't even want to use the word will. I'm just using because I don't have another word. Is basically Atzmus choosing to reveal himself, to express himself, to manifest in a particular way. So it doesn't have any entity, it doesn't have any identity of its own. All it is Atzmus, the Gilui of Atzmus. That's all it is. And that's why he's calling it Ayin Mamish. Before, when he said Ayin Mamish, he said it's completely nullified. It's the same idea, but he didn't emphasize this pure point. There was more Ayin Mamish because it has nothing else. All it is, it feels Atzmus. But it's even deeper. It's because its whole being is only because Atzmus wants to choose it. So he's choosing to manifest. Manifest doesn't have an independent ego or independent identity for that matter, or independent anything. All it is that koyach is galus in Atzmus, which he calls Ayin Mamish. Now, on the other hand, Ayin Shala Yesh HaNivra, Hu HaOra Shubchinis Yitzir is galus Matzmusei, Lahavis Yesh, as we learned. What is the second level of Ayin? That's already the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, where the divine chooses to create a ha'ara, a reflection, that it's not just a expression or not just a manifestation of Gilui of Atzmus, but this is already a that we call Yitzia Vizgalus. Yitzia does not mean physically leaving. It means it has now something of an independence to it. It's still so it's not really independent, but it's an that's is going to relate to Lahavis Yesh, to create the Yesh. So in other words, it's divine energy that's now focused on creation, not just revelation of the divine. Who, as we learned, Hu Ayidea Parsa, that's through the partition, Hamafsekes, Beineim, the partition that separates the two. Like we said, God could have done it without a Parsa, but he wants it to make sense. So what he did was, there's an that's just a reflection of me, of Atzmus that is. There's an that relates to existence. How is it possible that one moved to the other? They're both coming from the same source. So God created another thing called a Parsa, a partition that will diffuse, will somewhat separate between the two. So the now can focus not just on what Atzmus wants, but also on the object of what Atzmus wants, is creation. Like I explained, there's God's ambassador that represents God. And then there's the workers or the contractors or the people, the foremen, whatever, that are hired to build. Their focus has to be on building according to the plan of God, but their focus has to be on the building, not on the pure revelation of God's will. So therefore, that is the Parsa Mafsek B'Nesh. The Parsa is what causes the to move from divine soul, divine consciousness, to a state b'chinas richuk u'b'chinas avdala. That's somewhat distant and separate. Again, not distant and separate as distant and separate from God, God forbid, but distant and separate from being just seamless, pure field of energy, which is the higher level of Oyer and Bit. So you could say he's repeating what he said before, but he's using it now to explain how in Atzmus both are one. So we haven't gotten to that, but that's why he's quoting what he said. He says, because all this, the Hinin is barley ill, is coming to explain what we learned earlier, to explain how they become one, but based on what we learned earlier. So he's summing up what we learned earlier, and then he's going to obviously bring it together. Umashum zeh, and because of this parsa, because of this distance, hu b'bchinas kiruv el hayesh. That's what caused this to, since it's now not purely under the, let's call it under the aura of Atzmus, like the higher level of all it is just divine revelation. So that's why it can so-called move closer and relate to the Yesh. And that's why the bittul there is only a bittul Yesh, because it's already an that's relating to existence. Whether it's biyah, whether it's the kav, as he explained earlier. So now that he summed up the dynamics. Now he's going to bring it back. So let's see, how does Atzmus look at all this? We know how we look at it. We know how it's been explained as two approaches. So he says, now this whole separation, this whole pause, this whole interruption of the Parsa, meaning the Parsa that somewhat interrupts the flow or diffuses the flow, however you translate it. The effect of the Parsa is only from the point of view of the worlds and this cosmic order, the worlds and ishtalshlus. Compared from the perspective of the worlds of existence. And in general, ishtalshlus, Eilumis would be more Atzilus, Bri, Yetziras. Ishtalshlus would be the entire cosmic order, including the Kav and so on. That's how we distinguish it. So Eilumis is more the structure of the worlds, of the dimensions, and ishtalshlus is the whole order, the whole shalshelis, the whole chain, the whole process. HaTzimtzum v'Parsa ma'alim u'master. From their perspective, from our perspective, like think of the student who's receiving from the teacher. Absolutely, the Parsa plays a big role. Without it, we wouldn't understand what's being said. We wouldn't relate to it. So therefore, the Tzimtzum and the Parsa, the concealment and the partition, ma'alim conceals, u'master and covers, u'master and it covers up, u'moker hamahavam babachin slichuk v'avdola, and the source of their creation, of that which is creating them, comes with a leap, with a distance, and with a separation. There's like a quantum leap or a paradigm shift, depending what level. But it means it's not just flowing smoothly. The Parsa has created an interruption. The Parsa is like a curtain. It's not just letting the light through, it's somewhat limiting it. Varihu b'chinas yesh. And varihu, he probably means the existence. I don't think he means the Parsa, even though you could literally say it that way, but it sounds to me like he's talking about there's a state of Yesh. Being a state of Yesh, so of course the Parsa is affecting us. That's why we are a Yesh. If the Parsa didn't have any impact on us, we wouldn't be a Yesh. We'd be completely nullified. Or, as I said, completely overwhelmed. Okay. That's legabe Eilumis and ishtalshlus. What's that? I'm sorry, I skipped a line, most important line. Atzmus Ein Sof. But if you look from the perspective of Atzmus Ein Sof, the Tzimtzum and the Parsa, the concealment and the partition don't cover, don't hide, don't conceal, and don't cover anything. From that perspective, there's no hefsek, there's no pause, there's no interruption, and there's no distance at all. In other words, from God's eyes, He's with us equally, like we said before. There's no change. It's exactly the same thing. It's only from our perspective that these concealments have an impact. Like it says, Kael mistater. What does that mean? Indeed, you, Kael mistater, going on Hester concealment. The beginning of Hester, the koyach ein sof. You are the Kael that has the power to conceal. In other words, concealment does not affect you. You are the force. The concealment itself is a divine power, just like revelation. The beginning says through koyach ein sof k'moy koyach hagili. So not only doesn't it conceal him, it's actually a revelation of another revelation. It's just not in the form of revelation, but it's another expression of God's power to conceal. Like it says elsewhere. And like we learned earlier as well, that why is the koyach hester less divine than the koyach hagili? It's just a question of whether we see it or not. It's to us, obviously, you see something, you can relate to it more. When it's concealed, you don't relate to it as much. But that doesn't mean it's not a divine power. Because remember, the Eibishter is not defined by Gilui. Remember, Gilui, the higher level of Oyer, Yichud Law, the higher level of Eira Kol Batzmus, is also not him. He chose to express himself. But like we learned earlier, there's actually Oyer, in some ways, doesn't reveal as much about Atzmus as the Yesh does. We'll get to that soon as well. He's not saying that yet. Here he's just saying that the concealment itself does not conceal him, and indeed, he's the one that creates it. So the concealment is just another expression of the divine, except it's an expression through withholding, refraining. So restraint is also an expression. When you see a smart person, for example, speak, okay, that's his expression in a revealed way. When you see him being silent, that's not less of an expression. If you're smart enough, you understand in silence, you can probably sometimes read more than even in his words. Because it's also part of his power to restrain, to refrain. And being the power of concealment is also a power of Ein Sof. It's not master at all. It's master legaba the makablim. On this side of the curtain, yes, but not on that side of the curtain, because the curtain itself is him. Just like the power to reveal is him, the curtain itself, the Parsa itself is him. Vim came, and based on this, Gam b'chinas ha'ayin shel Yesh Moker Ha'elamis. And remember, the my ayin of Yesh Moker Ha'elamis came through the Parsa. So he's saying, based on this perspective, also the ayin that's already become a source to the world, what came through the Parsa, who gam came miyuchad b'chinas ha'atzmus mamish. So it's also completely united with Atzmus mamish, just like the higher level of Oyer that's encompassed in the Etzem, HaAmiti, the Ayin of the Yesh HaAmiti. So what he's saying is really that there are three things. From our perspective, there's Yichud Tata and Yichud Elah, and there's a Parsa. From the Atzmus perspective, Yichud Elah is not Atzmus perspective. Yichud Elah is only one perspective. Yichud Tata is another perspective. From Atzmus, these are both two equal divine forces that just manifest in different ways. And the difference is only for us, not for Atzmus, because Atzmus is not split into two.
And Atzmus Yichud Elah is the same thing like Yichud Tata.
What's that? Im Kain. And if that's the case, Gam B'chinas Ayin Zeh. So also this level of Ayin, the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, the lower level, the Kol Mash Nesava, and everything that was created from this point of view, Hakol B'chinas Ayin Mamish, B'chinas Bitl B'mitzias Mamish. So from that point of view, everything, the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra and the Yesh itself, all of its Avos is all Bitl B'mitzias Mamish, exactly like Yichud Elah. So bottom line is, before you may have thought that Yichud Elah is God's perspective, and Yichud Tata is our perspective. He's making it clear that's not the case. Yichud Elah is, yes, it's a high perspective coming from the top down, but it's only a perspective from Oyer HaKol Batzmus. Yichud Tata is a perspective from the Oyer that's Kiruv El Yesh, Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. By Atzmus, both of these are two equal. They're completely equal and one, and they're not two. They're like one thing. Don't worry, he's still going to ask in the next paragraph, so why is it called Kel Deis? Why is it called two Deis? Deis Das Sali and Das Tachna. If it's one, it's one. We'll get to that. But right now, that's what he's added. This is a pretty profound piece, obviously. But that's what he's added here. I just want to know if I should continue reading. I'll read quickly till the end of the paragraph, then I'll stop for some questions. So he says now like this. That's where it says, I am Rishon, I'm the first, and I'm the last, God says. And without me, and except for me, besides me, Ein Elikim, there's no Elikim. I'm the beginning, the end. Ani says, what does it mean when it says Ani? Oisius Ayin. So Ani means I, but it also the letters Ayin, Bitl. Yesh Beis b'chinas Ayin, Ani Rishon v'Ani Yachna. There are two levels of Ayin. Hainu Ayin shel Yesh HaAmiti, That's the first ayin. The ayin shall yesh the elemis. So there's the ayin of the yesh of the Yesh HaAmiti and the ayin of yesh elemis. The zeu ani arishin hu b'chinas ayin the keser. And Rishon is referring to the ayin because Rishon sometimes is keser. Is the ayin of keser? B'chinas ayin shall yesh HaAmiti, like we learned at the top of the page. The bottom of last page, I should say, that keser is the level, one of the ways of explaining the ayin is keser. It's the ayin of the Yesh HaAmiti. V'ani achrin, b'chinas malchus, is the level of malchus. Ha'ayin shall yesh the nevroim, the ayin of the yesh of creations, like we learned as well earlier. V'oimar, ani rishon v'ani achrin, dakol b'shtova. And he's saying, ani rishon, the first ayin, and the second ayin is all equal. Anihu, the base beginning ani. So it says twice ani. Behold, I who, the base beginning ani, the two levels of ani. Shneim shavim lefanav yizbarach. Both are equal before God. Ta'akol miyuchad b'atzmus yizbarach. It's all united in Atzmus. V'hu mipnei. And then he goes to the end of the verse, of the end of the statement. Shemibilodi ein Elikim. Elikim is the word for master, for Hester, Tzimtzum. Because there's no other God, God forbid. There's no Elikim, there's no Hester. That's how he's teaching me, Bilodi ein Elikim. There's no Hester. Ein Elikim ha-master umafsiklal. There isn't an Elikim that conceals or separates, or pauses or interrupts. V'im came. And if so, Kamoisha ayin aleph miyuchid b'atzmusei. Just like the first level of ayin. Is miyuchid, is one with atzmus, the higher level of ayin. Kamoikena ayin habeis miyuchid ubatel b'tachlis. Same as with the lower level of ayin. The second ayin is also united and utterly nullified or utterly sublimated or absorbed in and one with atzmus. And that concludes the paragraph. So, yeah, pretty heavy piece. I will explain it more, but I'm going to stop here. But that's how he's explained from Atzmus' point of view. That's the real ultimate unity. And it is being explained to us, which means that we're getting a taste of all these levels. But we have to go through the process. As I said earlier, Yechud Tata, Yechud Ilah, and then we can come to understand that from Atzmus' point of view, these are just two forms of one entity, one reality. Yeah, and you can't even call it two forms, to be honest. In Atzmus, it's all one because there's no difference between Gili and Helam and so on. But you can't get there, as I said, if you don't go through the lower levels. That's what we're going to discuss a lot more. But I will stop here if anybody wants to ask. And tomorrow Shabbos, on Monday, we'll resume and elaborate some more. Maybe this is perfect.
Tuesday, not Monday. Monday is Yom
Kippur. This is perfect Yom Kippur material, because Yom Kippur is when we become one with Yechida L'Yagdach, total unity. So maybe this is very good preparation for Yom Kippur. Okay, anybody wants to comment or ask?
All of this is only because Atzmus is above Yechud Eloh also. That's why they are.
I'm not sure that's. I don't think that's the punchline here exactly, but
Yechud Eloh and Yechud Tato, they are tools for Nisave. He should be Nisgale, but Atzmus himself is above all of this. Cannot say.
I mean, are you're just repeating what the Rebbe Rashab said, or you're adding something?
No, I'm asking. The Yechud Eloh,
you're just repeating what he just said here. That's what he said.
Okay, so you said it's the right thing. And but
yeah, but he said a lot more than that. But the Rebbe Rashab said a lot more. He explained why. And
because he's above all of this.
The Parsa that we've been elaborating on is only for us. The Parsa does not in any way affect from God, from Atzmus' point of view. That's why there's no difference, because if there's no Parsa, then there's no difference between the Ayin of the Yesh HaAmiti and the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, as he explained.
Yeah, but for us, Nivroim, Could you
So that's what he
law
said.
and
So
Yichud
those are
be
the words.
together?
L'gabe elemes v'ishtalshlus bilvad. HaTzimtzum v'Parsa ma'alim v'master. Aval l'gabe Atzmus HaTzimtzum Parsa eina ma'alim v'master klal. Those are the key lines in explaining this idea. But yeah, what you just said is what he said here. Yeah, if that's what you're asking,
Question
I'm confirming that.
Thank you. My question is, by us nivroim, is it possible that Yichud Eloah and Yichud Torah are one thing, are together?
Didn't I just say that we're being taught this for a reason? Because we go through our process. When we can climb, as one understands Yichud Torah, then they move to Yichud Eloah. After understanding it and integrating it properly, I gave a whole introduction before that you can't jump. A 2-year-old can't be a 40-year-old. You have to learn and grow and grow and grow until you begin to absorb these deeper levels. And then we try to then come to understand this piece where we're talking about from Atzmus' perspective. That's one of the gifts of Chassidus, is teaching us how Atzmus sees it, not just how we see it. And the answer is yes, to some extent, we can come to appreciate it. I can assure you that it takes years. So some of us will appreciate it more, some less, everyone on their level. It's all relative. We don't have to be equals. It all comes down to how well you work on it and how closely you come to understand things. But remember, you cannot see God and live. You have to do something to get there. And that's very heavy Aveda that we need to do on lower levels to be able to come to such an appreciation. As mathematically and technically, everybody could read what we just read. But to actually experience it, to actually live it, and completely, that needs a lot of Aveda. Because Yichud Tata is quite an achievement too. So first we learn about it, then we work on trying to assimilate it in some way to our lives. Like I mentioned Yom Kippur. Relatively speaking, what is the difference when you go into Kol Nidre and when you say Ne'ilah, Shema, and Baruch Shem and Havayu Elokim at the end of it? So for most people, they'll say the only difference is I'm a lot hungrier because at the end of the day, I can't wait to eat. But in Inyan, you should have gone on a journey where Kol Nidre, beginning of Yom Kippur, would have been a nefesh experience. And Shachris would have been a ruach experience. And then Musaf would be neshama. And Mincha would be chaya. And Ne'ilah would be yechida. So by the time you're by Ne'ilah and you're saying Shema Yisrael, after that whole day of journeying, you're at the top of the mountain now. And you're getting a taste, relatively speaking only, of these higher levels of Yehuda, of Yichud Eloah, Yichud Tata, or the Yichud that is talking Yechidah Liachdach. Again, it's all relative. But in Inyan, that's how Aveda works. You climb the ladder. You can't get to the top of the mountain if you don't climb all the levels before it, right? No one's going to just put you on top of a mountain. It doesn't work that way. You have to climb. So the answer is yes, we could come to understand this and ultimately integrate it. Is it work? Yes, a lot of work. Right now, let's focus on trying to understand what he's saying. Then we'll talk about how do you apply it to our lives personally. But right now, it's a total, utter, what he's saying here is total, utter, I've spoken about this a number of times, completely absorbed in the essence of the essence. There's nothing but God. Can a person experience that? I think there are moments that some of us have a taste of it. But I don't want to go there right now. I want to just talk about this level. So there's Yehuda Tata, Yehuda Eloah, 2 days, and now he's adding that Kel Deis Havaya in Atzmus, the 2 days are like one, even though they are opposites from our perspective and 2 different levels with a Parsa and everything in between.
Rabbi Jacobson.
Thank you. You explained it very well.
There is 1 second. A question that could be asked: does God Atzmus see it from our perspective? In other words, that's nice to say Atzmus is not bound by the Tzimtzum, not limited, but can God see it from Das Tachten perspective? Does God see it that way? Or are we going to say that Atzmus, when Atzmus looks at it, can never see it the way we see it because we're limited, and Atzmus is not limited? So that's an interesting discussion, and we'll have that discussion as well. This goes back to.
I think the answer is clear. Yes.
This goes back to how much Ma'aser Tachtenim is negay in Atzmus.
Yeah.
How God relates to us, how our mitzvahs and avedas affect Lamaila, I'm going to discuss it at length. But for now, let's just stick to what he said so far. That essentially, from Atzmus' perspective, all these distinctions don't exist, and therefore it's an utter unity. But there's more to discuss and more to learn, a lot more. So at this point, I'm going to, any other questions?
Yes, Rabbi
I
Jacobson.
think that
I
the
have a
answer for
comment.
your
One second,
question
just
is
flame it.
yes.
Let someone else ask.
No, but you cleared it very beautiful, but still not completely. That means
Completely, my
that
friend, you may take a 5 lifetimes. So just know that. Be ready for that. I don't
okay.
think I'll ever come.
Everyone knows that the Abishta goes into Golis with us. He can beam down on anything he wants. It's all one, but he goes through the motions of being Golis with us. I mean, that's like a fact.
Okay, so if you haven't figured out, great. I don't have it figured out so easily. Okay.
Rabbi Jacobson, the issue of Ani Rishon and Ani Acharon, I have an interesting chidush that I learned that I think actually very fitting here. If you take the letters Yud K Vav K, and you go the letters that become before it, and the letters that comes after it, it has the same gematria as the word Ani, which is 61. So the before Yud will be the Tet Dalet Hey Dalet. After the Yud K Vav K will be Kaf, Vav Zayin Vav. And if you add those, it's the gematria 61, which is the same word as Ani. So Ani Rishon, Ani Acharon, it actually fits beautifully in this.
Okay, thank you.
I know you're going to say I'm processing here in this question. By the way, it was a nice touch, George. I know you're going to say I'm processing too much here, but I guess I have to ask the question. When we think about Kriyat Shema, Shem Hu Elokim, which we're going to say on Yom Kippur and really try and understand as Yehudim, it's the same one Atzmus. Is this to say, if we are able to integrate all this into our lives and really understand it, that essentially there's not really, and just bear with me here, there's not really Ein Elokim. I'm not saying Ein Elokim, there's no God. I'm saying Ein Elokim, there's just Atzmus. And so in other words, you say that we coordinate Hashem on Rosh Hashanah, and we're focusing on Malchus. So we're really focusing on Shem Elokim, essentially, it seems, at least particularly. And then on Yom Kippur, we could say we're focusing more on Atzmus, I guess, ultimately, because it's at the end, Yechida of the Nefesh to the Atzmus of the Eberster. But nevertheless, with this, you want to talk about Yehudim of Yehudim. Yehudim of Yehud Tata and with the Yehud Ilah. It's really a Yehud of Yehudim. It was what we just talked about. It's one perspective. Is this to say that if we're seeing things in the right manner, essentially, we're not davening, if you will, to Hashem Elokecha, which is the manifestation of godliness in our world per se. He's the sovereign Elohim, I'm saying, but essentially, you could say he's set it up that way. But if you see through it, if you can process what we just learned, or perhaps
I'm not sure what you say. We never daven. We always daven only to Hashem.
Of course,
What are you suggesting? I'm not clear what you're asking.
I'm saying that Shem Elokim is the perspective of God that is sovereign over this world, that creates rules that and
right.
But at the same time, it's still all one God, Atzmus. So, in other words, well,
I'm not clear. It's not clear to me, at least, what you're saying.
What the question is? The way
No, so
we
you're going
divide
in and out. It's hard to hear you.
All right, let's just drop it.
In the bottom line, is it possible to say that even in Yehudat Torah, everything is the Eibishter?
Listen, let me make a suggestion as a teacher here. We learned a very deep piece right now I would advise that, like Moshe, like Hashem did with Moshe, make a hefsek bein parsha leparsha. I would suggest absorb it, study it again, read it inside. You could hear this recording, and then we could always discuss it further. I'm not running anywhere. We don't have to rush it. It's not an idea that's going to be easily understood completely in a first try. So we learned what we learned. We'll discuss it much more. Don't try to overthink it. Right now, it's you can read it again. He did not say there are no two days. He said there's Yechudei Tata, Yechudei Lo. He's just saying from Atzmus perspective, unites them because of the reasons he explained. So I would suggest read it. Hadarabah. You want to read it during Yom Kippur when you're saying Avayu Elokim or the other tefillas? By all means. Applying it in Aveda, everybody can apply as they see fit. I don't think there's one way to apply it. But we'll discuss it. It's not as I said, we're not running away from this, not moving away. We'll go over it again. We'll go over it as many times as need be. I do think it'll take a little time for everybody to go through it again. Read it a few times, and you'll see it'll get clearer and clearer as you go. It'll probably get more confusing, and then it'll get clear, I should add.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for everything.
We'll talk. Listen, what you said Monday is not good. We're not resuming after Monday. Why not?
It's Yom Kippur.
Monday is Yom Kippur.
Oh no, I'm sorry. You're right. Okay, sorry. Tuesday. Yeah. I'm sorry. I was thinking because Sunday is Erev Yom Kippur. We don't have a class. Monday is Yom Kippur. Yeah, of course not. Good, got it. Tuesday morning, right? Okay. Any final thoughts from anyone? By all means. I'm not, by the way, trying to silence or stop questions. I'm just suggesting that I think it will be a little easier if you read it a few times. That's all I'm saying.
I don't know if that was the deepest I've ever learned Hasidus or the highest, but maybe that's the whole point. It's the deepest and the highest biyachad.
Probably.
That one class today, this class today, to me, was the deepest and highest I've ever gone, I think, in Hasidus. It was amazing. Incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, oh my gosh. Whoa. Oh my gosh. Oh. You can just think about this share and go over it 10 times.
Yeah.
I guess I have one question. The HaAmiti. You alluded to it there about the concealment and so on, but he didn't actually use the term, I don't think, HaAmiti today. Will he refer back to that?
I wish he does. I don't think he will because it's not finished, but I have a lot to say on that topic, actually. This is even higher than the HaAmiti, just for the record.
Wow.
Because here, the Helam and Gilui are completely both essentially equal creations, if you want to put it a certain way.
Yeah.
So HaAmiti is the mocker that there's no real Helam because it's God's power to conceal. That's true. But here he's going that Helam and Gilui are not even are two equal, even more than Helam. It's not just the HaAmiti is God's power, is that it's equal to God's power to reveal. We'll talk. There's a lot to say on this still, because there's still questions. Trust me, it's not 100% clear because we don't want to either say that all the structure God created is an illusion. Because based on this, you could argue easily that everything we experience that has two different bittul and so on is not real. It's like it's a sleight of hand. And the truth in reality is this. How does, so we need to still connect it all. But the Rebbe Rashab does address it afterwards. He does continue discussing this. Yeah. Great.
Incredible. I have this bookmark as the one share to go to. That was it.
As I said, it's a perfect entree into Yom Kippur.
Amazing.
This is a very important point, what you said just now about the way that we see. Are we existing or not? You need ACS to explain it.
Yeah. you can buckle your seatbelts. Trust me, I'll show you some things from Torah Shalom that'll blow your mind that are,
Wow.
I think, going to be very helpful to understand this. I mean, this is the Rebbe Rashab at his best. Only the Rebbe
Unbelievable.
Rashab of all the Rabbeim goes this far. You're not going to find such language. I mean, even though the Mittler Rebbe does say this more or less, but this extent of explanation about Helam and Gili and all that, the Rebbe Rashab spells it out very, very explicitly. Yeah.
Yes.
The Helam Atzmi is also not Atzmus, right?
For sure not. Of course not.
Of course not.
It's a very, very high level, but it's we'll talk about it. I don't want to jump there. It's a little too. Let's understand this first before we discuss Helam Atzmi.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much. Good Shabbos and a Marcusima
Okay, good Shabbos, everyone. Let me stop the recording here. We finished the paragraph at the bottom of page 1474.